Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 68 of the Bladeology podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'd like to take a second to thank our sponsor, the New Jersey Steel Baron. If you are in need of any kind of specialized steel, make sure to hit those guys up. They've got an amazing selection of steel on hand, ready to ship right now. They are featuring the newest and most awesome Hitachi blue and Hitachi white steels. Pretty exciting to see that stuff stateside, ready to go. Again, that's the Hitachi Aogami blue and the Hitachi Shirogami white. Check them out at NewJerseySteelBaron.com. Tell them the boys from the podcast sent you, or you can give them a call at 973-949-4140. Thanks so much. Hope you enjoy the episode. All right, we're going to jump into this like we do every week. Welcome to another episode of the Bladeology podcast. We are on this week with a guest. I am your host, Jeremiah Burbank from PVK.com. I'm on with my co-host, Nick Chuprin of NCC Knives. Nick, are you there?
Yep.
All right, and we're on with our long-term third up co-host, Chuck Gudradis from Gudradis Handmade Knives. Chuck, are you there?
I am here. Happy to be here.
Awesome. Okay, and we're on this week with Kirk Mayberry. Kirk, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
Good, man. All right. It's been a long time coming. We're pumped to have you here. We're gonna go over your knife making journey tonight. All the gory details and how we got here and how you got into it. So I know you've got a lot going on. You're a man of many talents and an interesting and storied past. So let's jump into it. How did where were you from originally? Where did this all start? Where'd you grow up?
Born and raised in Columbia, Tennessee. It's about 50 miles south of Nashville. Um, spent most of my youth out in the woods, hunting, fishing, doing the normal kid stuff. I guess my knife journey actually started probably way back then. Ended up joining the Cub Scouts. I got my first knife when I was 5, and within 2 days, I cut my finger open. From there, just kind of progressed different types of knives through the camping scene. Um, yeah, I mean, other than that, I went to a Christian academy. Grew up going to race tracks with my dad. He raced cars, and then I got into racing dirt bikes. Graduated at 17.
You wait, hold on. You were racing dirt bikes?
Yeah. Started riding dirt bikes, I guess, I don't know, somewhere around 5 or 6. And I started racing, and I did that for, I think, 14 years. Yeah, I got a lot of injuries over the years. Broke every finger, uh, destroyed an ankle, my knees hurt, dislocated a hip.
Jesus. Okay. So what class of dirt bikes are we talking about here? Like, we're talking about standard, like, 2-cycle dirt bikes? Like, what size engine?
I started on 50s, and then the last bike I raced was a YZ 450. Of course, during my time of racing, they switched from running 2-stroke engines to 4-stroke engines.
Oh, shit, okay.
So, yeah, and I've raced several different states. I've raced all over Tennessee, some in Alabama. I even raced up in Rhode Island and Massachusetts when I lived up there. Worked at a motorcycle shop up there, so that was pretty neat.
So are you like are you covered in medals? Did you win a bunch of tourneys or what?
I've got a whole box of trophies from the years. I think it's up in my attic. I don't really look at them anymore. I did get pretty lucky one year. Went qualified for Loretta Lynn's, which just took place a couple weeks ago. Actually, it's the amateur nationals. They do the top. I think it's. I don't remember if they're doing 20 riders or 40 riders now, but it's usually the top 40 riders in the country. They all come together and race one major race, and then people get sponsorships, and some guys get full factory rides out of the nationals.
So were you sponsored?
I was sponsored by a local shop. Um, I got some gear pretty cheap, uh, bikes, um, parts. Uh, it definitely helped because it's an expensive sport.
Yeah, I would imagine. So when you get sponsored, just a small tangent here, like you get so they give you parts, they give you gear. But I mean, do they give you cash to travel with too, or that's on you?
That all comes down to your sponsorship and the contract you have with them. So typically, typically you can get like parts deals, and they'll give you a certain percentage off, or they'll just give you so many parts a year, or you get a tire deal, and they'll give you say 10 sets of tires for the whole season. Um, it's like these guys that just finished Loretta's and got signed to a full factory ride. They're getting all their travel paid for, all their gas, all their gear, everything. But they end up getting gear deals outside of just the bike deals. Um, Depending on what level you're on, there are some tracks that have money you can win. So, like, there's one that goes on in Tennessee. Winner takes home, I think, $3,000. And Suzuki, at the time I was racing, Suzuki just gave a bike to him.
That's pretty dope. That's a pretty legitimate like upgrade. Okay. So wow. All right. So you traveled all over. You were a sponsored dirt bike racer. You said you came all the way up to Massachusetts. So you traveled all over the place, or just sort of in the Northeast corridor?
Uh, so when I graduated high school, I graduated at 17. My mom had married a guy and moved up to Rhode Island, and I wanted to change of pace. Well, I worked at a machine shop for a little bit here in Tennessee, then worked at the Saturn manufacturing plant, then went back to the machine shop, moved to Rhode Island, and actually I was like 5 or 7 minutes away from Stephen Carroll, and didn't even know it until I moved back.
Oh shit.
But but yeah, I lived up there for 8 years. Met some kids, learned how to play bass in a week, and then played my first show.
Oh wow. Okay. So that was a okay. There's a lot there. So you did a bunch of stuff. So you all right. So you graduated high school and you worked at so you did work at a machine shop.
Yeah, it was a friend of ours. Actually, the guy who owned it was the scoutmaster for the troop that I was in. I was in Troop 103 in the Boy Scouts. Became an Eagle, but I ended up working for him at his shop. I was sweeping the floor, worked my way up to bandsaw, worked my way up to uh, drill press, and then did a bunch of welding and stuff. And then went from there to got a job at Saturn manufacturing plant, and I was driving a golf cart between all the different buildings, just recharging the batteries for the forklifts. Kind of have an interesting story about that job.
So just to be clear, we're talking about Saturn, like the car company, like the GM Saturn.
Yep. Yeah, they have a manufacturing plant down here in Spring Hill, Tennessee.
Those cars were far out, man. My mom had a couple of those. Like they were they were strange, but like looking back at them, they were actually kind of neat. Like very ahead of their time as far as aerodynamics go, and definitely very economically built. Wait, so they still have a factory there, or it must have closed? No.
The factory's still there. I'm not sure what they're building anymore. I know they were trying to run an SUV and parts of Corvette through it, but I don't think they're doing Corvette anymore. Interesting fact about Saturn: my stepmom's father. The whole reason they ended up here because she's from England. Her dad had pitched the idea of lost foam sand casting for their engine blocks. So he was the head over the department for Saturn.
Okay, that's pretty far out. So you have so you have like a pretty strong like connection to Saturn. Then that's like not wow. All right. Hmm. So you must have been in sort of a shoe in for that job. Then they were like, we got you.
Not really. I had to start just like anybody else. Most people are either in a union and they get in to work on the line, or you go through a temp agency, and they just put you wherever, and you can eventually work your way to getting on the line. So I worked through a temp agency for Ryder, um, who does all the maintenance on the forklifts. That included keeping the batteries maintained on the premise so that the forklift drivers can just come over and grab a fresh battery and go.
All right. So how long was your stint at the Saturn plant?
I want to say maybe a year or less than a year. There was a guy that got hired and then he got fired, and I was working uh, first shift. He was on second, so then they moved me to second, and then they fired somebody that was on third, and then moved me back to first, and then ended up working third and first, and then basically told them I was done. That was too much work for 18-year-old. Quick, interesting story. While I was working out there, the batteries that those forklift runs on are like uh, 24 car batteries ran in series, uh, and they're just in a giant metal case. And those metal cases and the forklift or the crane that lifted the batteries up uh, out of those forklifts were made at the machine shop that I
What?
used to work at.
Okay. So everything is just
There's always
tied together somehow.
everything in my everything in my life has these weird connections and
Wow.
coincidences.
Okay. That's far out, dude. So, all right, working at the Saturn plant at 18, and then you were in the Boy Scouts and you made Eagle Scout, which is no joke. I mean, that's pretty serious.
Yeah, only like 12% of boys who join the Boy Scouts become Eagle.
Yeah. Wow. Okay, so um that's nuts. I mean, so Eagle Scouts usually right, 12%. Yeah, no, like I don't even know any Eagle Scouts. All of my friends just totally failed out of Boy Scouts. Uh so I mean that usually
So about
yeah,
the
go ahead.
time I about the time I was getting Eagle, my dad became the scoutmaster for the troop because ours was stepping down, and uh, I want to say it was like 74 to 76 of the scouts that came through my dad's tenure became Eagle, which is amazing considering that the national average is only 12%.
So for like a New York City kid, I hear this a lot, and people always talk like it's a big deal. I don't actually understand what an Eagle Scout is or why it's such a big deal.
So in the Boy Scouts, they teach you leadership skills, they teach you survival skills, they teach you um, how to make fires, how to survive in the wilderness, or how to survive in life in general. There's the whole leadership skills thing. For instance, when I got out of high school, a buddy of mine decided he was going to go join the army, and in the same building was the Air Force. So I thought, well, I'm here. My grandfather flew planes for the Navy in Korea, so I was like, you know what? I'll take the ASVAB for the Air Force. When I got done, the guy told me, he's like, you'll start one rank higher than everybody else, and you'll have a pay raise just because you're an
Damn.
Eagle Scout.
That's baller. Okay. Yeah, no. So no, Nick, Eagle Scouts like a real thing. So I mean,
Yeah, no, I hear about this a lot. But like as a New York
yeah.
City kid, like we didn't do Scouts.
No, I mean that Eagle Scout is a very respected position that usually leads to generally it leads to some sort of military or militaristic style of training. Kirk can correct me if I'm wrong, but generally, uh police, law enforcement, Marines, yeah, Air Force. It usually leads to some sort of serious
A
position.
lot of presidents were Eagle Scouts.
Yeah, right, exactly. Like the CIA, FBI famously love recruiting Eagle Scouts. Like it's definitely a sign of adaptability and high intelligence. So that's really cool, man.
And it's a lot of work to get your Eagle. I know for me, for my Eagle project, I had to make a plan of some type of community project and lead everybody else in the troop to build it, gather funds from other businesses to fund it, and I had to do all that on my own. What I ended up doing for mine is I built an access ramp and um fencing, and I think we even put in some playground equipment for a women and children's shelter. Um, it was around their little backyard playground area.
I mean, yeah, that's a good service to the community right there. That's no joke. That's cool, man.
And my little brother got his, and he went and cleaned off a cemetery that was actually from some of the original settlers that were my ancestors for Tennessee. Yeah, the gravestones have Revolutionary War hero signs on them.
So you went over and you were like, screw it, I'll apply for the Air Force. So, but you had a change of heart, or you were just seeing if you could get in, or what level you'd be at.
Yeah, basically, I just wanted wasting time. I didn't want to sit around and be bored. Of course, at the time I was racing dirt bikes, so physically, the physical part of it was easy. When it came to the evaluation test, it was all multiple choice. So like the first three, I actually like read them and kind of worked through them in my head, and after that, I was like just read the question and guessed one. I ended up doing really good. I don't remember what the score was, but it was above the national average from the way the guy was acting. He told me I would never see the cockpit of a plane. He said I'd be sitting behind a desk. So I told him like, well, I don't want to join if that's the case.
You're like, screw that. That sounds boring as hell.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm going to join, I want to fly a plane, right? That's the whole point.
I think so. Yeah, when people join the Air Force, I don't think they think about yeah, cleaning the mess hall. I think they think the Top Gun pretty much, like jump in an F-16, go blow some shit up. All right, so let's see. So Saturn plant, dirt bike racing. So what? Okay, let's progress through that. So what was? Let's start from the Saturn plant. What was after the Saturn plant? That was the dirt bike racing.
Well, I was racing the whole time, growing up as a kid, all through school up into high school, and still trying to race some, as a young adult. And then went after Saturn, I went back to the machine shop for a little bit, and then I decided I wanted to change of pace, so packed my bags and moved to Rhode Island.
Okay, well that's a pretty extreme move from where you were to Rhode Island. That's directly in located in New England. So how'd you decide on that? Was it a job or was it a girl?
My mom actually married a guy that was from up there, and she moved up there when I was 16. So I'd gone to visit, and it was different. So I just wanted to experience something outside of small town Tennessee.
Okay, all right. So you moved to Rhode Island. Where were you in Rhode Island?
Woonsocket was the town that I moved to. Um, but I've lived in I had an apartment in Providence. I lived in Newport for a little bit. Um, North Situate for a little bit. And I don't know, I ended up back in Woonsocket.
So you bouncing around Rhode Island for a little while. Tell us a little bit about that. That must have been kind of a culture shock, right?
Major change from down here. Uh, Biggest change is the food. And honestly, I really miss all the food options. Up in Rhode Island, like within 20 minutes, you can get whatever you want, whether that's Greek food, Italian food, uh, Asian food, you name it. It's within 20 minutes. Down here, it's just like Southern meat and three restaurants just about everywhere. And a meat and three is meat, some type of starchy food, usually mashed potatoes, green beans, three sides, and I figured I ought to say what a meat and three is. Most people probably don't know.
I get it. Now that I'm in New Hampshire from New York, it's like that's one thing you don't appreciate until you lose it.
I miss being able to order a calzone at 4 a.m. You can't do that here. Everything closes by like 10 o'clock.
Yeah, it's 10 here too. Like you get home, it's 11. You're drunk, and you're like, I want some garbage, and my fridge is empty, and it's like you have no options. You have that like one Burger King that's open till 12, but you have to drive there, and of course you're drunk. So
When I lived in Rhode Island, I worked for this company. It was books for charity. They've got these big blue bins, and people just donate books and DVDs. And I drove a 16-foot box truck all over the Boston area, emptying those bins out. But I worked third shift, so I'd get home at like typically between 2 and 3. I could finish earlier, I could finish later. So I'd get home, and then I'd call this place in Cumberland, or no, Manville. It was Manville Pizzeria, and I'd called him so many times. As soon as he would see my number, he was like, "Oh yeah, it's Kirk." He's like, "You want a calzone with pepperoni and black olives and blah blah blah? We'll have it right there." Never give me a price, just hang up on me, and as long as I called before 4 a.m., they would deliver it.
Yeah, there's definitely there's benefits to being in a densely populated urban area like that. For sure, the cuisine styles, types, and availability at any hour definitely come into play for sure. I could see that. So you were driving a 16-foot like a tractor trailer all around Boston, and you did that the whole time you were working in Rhode Island.
No. So when I first moved to Rhode Island, I worked at CVS mailroom for a little bit. That was probably the worst job I've ever had. It wasn't hard. It was boring. Like you just picked up a pile of papers and walked around and stuffed these little boxes. And then when you got over to the end, you grabbed a different pile and started all over again. So I did that for a while, and then worked at a motorcycle shop there in Woonsocket. Worked there for several years. Sold a dirt bike and a bunch of gear to Paulie D from Pauly Shore, so it was pretty neat. His bouncer, his big, his big bouncer dude, was probably like the most cuddly person I've ever met.
That's pretty far out. Okay, so you were working. Was it like a regular? Was it just a standard motorcycle shop, or was it just dirt bike shop?
On the middle of a motorcycle shop, they had street bikes, ATVs, side by sides, on road, off road bikes. They had all various different types of dirt bikes. Of course, there's different genres of dirt bikes. There's like your woods type riding, and they're usually detuned a little, and then you've got your race bikes. And did a little bit of everything.
I misheard that. Did you sell the motorcycle parts and motorcycle to Pauly Shore or his bouncer?
Ollie D.
Oh,
From
Pauly
Jersey.
D. At these from Jersey. Oh, I thought I saw Pauly Shore because I was like, we met him in Kentucky
Nah.
that time. I was like, did you ask him? Never mind.
Dude, I watched Polly Shore walk through Kentucky, and I was like, "There's a homeless student here." And then somebody beside me was like, "No, that's Polly Shore." I was like, "No, it's not."
That was like 2 hours of everybody trying to figure out if he was really into building or not. And then he just sat down and I just made fun of everybody for being fat neckbeards drinking beer in the hallways.
I mean, to be fair,
Dude, he looked straight homeless. Like, looked like somebody had just grabbed a bunch of clothes they found off the side of the road. He was walking around with it on.
This past Kentucky was better. Me and you were drunk on the third floor, and Adam Ray's room was right next to where we were drinking. He came out and
Yeah.
joined.
Now, I really want to get down and watch a comedy show one of these days.
Yeah, they get big acts there because like the last 2 years I got the show, they had big acts at the recent comedy club, but the comedy show is at 6 to 8 that's when we're working the show.
I keep getting sidetracked by those truffle fries.
they'll get you every time. They're delicious.
The Sidewinder fries at Palmer's.
What I really miss is the hotel itself used to have a Wagyu burger, and they got rid of it. So order a Wagyu burger straight to your room.
All right, so we're working at the motorcycle shop, selling bikes, selling parts. Where do we go from there?
I started working at that Books for Charity company as a forklift driver, actually. Basically, they have what they call gaylords, those giant boxes that sit on top of a wooden pallet. They'd hold somewhere between, on average, 6,000 to 10,000 pounds worth of books in them. So I was the forklift driver, basically just moving around all day long, loading up the semis as they came in, convinced the boss to let me drive the truck instead of being in the warehouse, and which is a feat in itself because I was like a maybe 140 pounds, maybe 130 actually. Uh, but I ended up getting the gig and drove all around the Boston area in a 16-foot box truck. You think a 16-foot with a really big U-Hauls. You ever see those yellow Penske trucks? They're like 16 to 18 foot on average.
I've driven a couple of those cross country, filled with a bunch of knives a couple of times.
Yeah, so I was picking up books in those, and I'd fill up 10 of those Gaylord boxes a night. And once they were full, I was done. So there'd be some stops I'd go to, and you know, I'd do 2 or 3 stops and be full, and that's it. I'm done for the night. And there'd be other days where I'd work 13 hours and didn't have all of them full. So
Driving around in a truck, hauling that shit, and then bringing it back.
yeah, and unloading it with a hand jack
Pass.
because the forklift wouldn't fit in there.
Pass. Okay. But did it have a lift gate, or did you at least have a loading dock?
So they all had a lift gate. We'd get to the bins, and you'd have to empty them out into the thing, and then put it on the lift gate, raise it up, drag it in. But yeah, it was all over Boston. I don't know if you've driven through some of the back roads in Boston. So they get really narrow. There was one alley that I went through, had like 1 inch of space on each side of the mirror of the truck going down. So I got pretty good at driving.
Those streets were never meant to be driven down. They're just cow paths that eventually got paved.
Yeah, they were made for a horse and buggy.
Literally. Yes. Yeah.
So I did that for a while, and then during my time up there, I'd met some kids. I guess I ought to go. I did one guitar lesson when I was really young. I want to say like 7 or 8, and then moved up there, met some kids. They were in a band, little high school thing, and their bassist broke his ankle and then quit. And then I convinced one of them to teach me how to play, and I learned 5 songs in a week. And then played my first show at the living room in Providence, which is now gone.
Oh shit.
That
Wait,
was
I didn't know that
huge.
closed.
Yeah, they've been gone for several years.
Damn. That's crazy that you played there. I've seen more than a few shows there.
I've played a lot of shows there.
Damn. Okay. That's pretty dope. That's pretty cool. So you sort of fell into it and then convinced somebody to teach you, and then you were just playing shows in the living room.
Yeah, so well, I convinced them to teach me, and they had like a little backyard pool gig for one of their friends, and I went and watched it, and then I was like, yeah, well, teach me, whatever songs y'all have, and then I'll see about getting us a show. So he's like, yeah, I'll teach you, and then sent out a few emails and got us a gig at actually the first real gig we had was at the living room. They were all fresh out of high school, and I just moved up there, so I was just trying to make friends. And we played that first gig, and I was hooked.
You were like, all right, this is it. I'm ready to do this full time.
Well, at the time, I didn't really think it would be full time. I just wanted to do it and keep doing it because, it was fun. It was different. Everybody dreams about being that rock star, and I actually had an opportunity to chase that. So, I was learning the whole routine of being in a band, practicing, writing new stuff, learning new stuff, and also learning how to manage that and set up shows and start hitting different venues and then get in touch with different promoters. Yeah, I did that for 8 or 9 years.
Oh, wow. Okay. So it sounds like you were the responsible band member, because most bands are a collection of different individuals, and there's usually that one dude who's like, that's the one who does the stuff. That was you.
Yeah, there's always you've got typically it's not not the bassist that does everything. And I really didn't have an option. I did end up learning different instruments and playing in a couple other side projects and bands through the years and different instruments. But um, yeah, we had one guy that was just all he talked about or all he wanted to do was drums. And actually, Chuck got to meet him when I went up to Chuck's shop for a collab. My buddy Shane. Um, he was always drums. We practiced in his grandparents' attic. Uh, our vocalist was more. He was sociable, so like he was easy to talk to, easy to get along. So he was really good at talking with people. And then our two guitar players, they had different styles, but they blended together well. So I kind of took up the slack and ran with it because, to be honest, bass isn't that hard. Although mostly what I was playing was basically rhythm guitar parts with a little fill to match the drums. Not typical for a bass player.
You're keeping rhythm for everybody in the band, man.
I also did backup vocals for that band, which was fun. Learned how to do scream vocals without destroying my vocal cords.
Hmm. So okay, so what kind of music was it? Like,
So that first band was hardcore metalcore. The band's name is A Casual Betrayal, and you actually might be able to still find some old recordings on YouTube. I know there's a song that's on there. It's called Breathe, and that was like bottom barrel, some dude's basement recording. So it's not the greatest, but it's out there still.
okay, it's got a grungy feel. I'm down. That's worth checking out.
So we did that for a while, and some people started going different directions. And then I bounced around from a couple other bands. One called Death Becomes Her. Then I think it was later changed to Blood Red Skies. And there was one called Action in the Skyline. I ended up leaving that band. I think they still play, or they might. Action in the Skyline actually had a 15-year-old guitar player who ended up going to one of the major music schools up there in Massachusetts.
Oh, Berkeley?
Yeah, he got a free, pretty much free ride. He got a pretty major scholarship just to go there. That's how good this kid was.
That's some fancy boy shit right there. Just where give me a rough date on when this stuff is happening.
So yeah, I moved back to Tennessee 11 years ago, so the 8 years previous to that.
Was that what is about 2018? Oh, 18 years ago. I see what you're saying.
Yeah, it's been a while.
Okay. All right.
So when we talked in Kentucky, at some point you were traveling internationally.
Yeah, I picked up a few gigs here and there. Fill in and stuff. It wasn't anything I was like major part of.
Okay. Well, still traveling internationally for music, that's I've never done that. So wait, so what were you doing for international band travel?
Fill in. So like, if somebody, I don't want to name any names or put anybody out there. So, for instance, somebody goes to another country and tries to sneak in some paraphernalia, right? They end up getting sent home. I'd go fill in if I knew the band or knew. So I got to bounce between a couple different places. Probably my favorite place. Stopped in Japan for a couple of days. Stopped northern Germany. 2 or 3 shows here or there. Most of the time it was just stuff. It was all up in the Northeast. Through my time, like I got to open for some big bands. I don't know if you've heard of any of them, but like Misery Signals opened for them. Uh, One of the weirdest shows I ever opened for was Five Finger Death Punch, and they had midget wrestling.
Nice.
Uh,
Okay.
I ran into one of the midgets at the bar, and all of his clothes was in the laundry, so he didn't have a shirt. So I had a spare shirt, gave it to him. It turns out it was a midget that was on. It was the guy from Jackass who was in the bar fight scene. No, not Wee Man. I can't remember the guy's name. He's passed away now, but he was a wrestler, and they had a ring set out in the middle of the floor. Oddly enough, we had a bigger crowd than Five Finger Death Punch, and they were on the radio.
Wow. All right. So you guys drew some serious crowds.
Yeah, we did all right. See who else opened for As I Lay Dying once. That's probably the biggest one.
That's pretty kick ass.
We came as Romans. They're all still pretty good friends of mine. I try to keep in touch when I can.
Yeah, that's a serious lineup. Yeah, first two As I Lay Dying albums are pretty kick ass.
Yeah, not too bad. He had to make a rough name for himself.
So all right, so you're all over the place. I mean, like internationally, okay, fill in whatever. I mean, that's still cool as hell. Uh, what was your favorite part about Japan?
The food, like, I'm a big food guy. I don't look it because I'm not very big, but now in Japan we got done with the show and walked down the road and went off in this like sketchy little back alley just because it smelled good. Popped out into this little opening. It was just some old lady selling noodles out of a cart. That was probably the best noodles I've ever had.
That sounds like one of those, yeah, for sure. Just like wandering around late at night, and like the best spots are like the ones that are not necessarily the most popular.
It's always the sketchy spots, man. I'm telling you, the sketchiest spot in Colombia has the best hot wings. Like it's on the edge of the hood. So I'm a little scared when I go there.
That's a good rule of thumb, kids. If you're not scared while you're eating, it's not good. All right, go someplace where you're uncomfortable, and it's probably really good food.
Well, it's like everybody comes to Nashville and goes to eat at Hattie B's. Nashville is famous hot chicken. Uh, Prince's is a little more of a rougher looking place, and to me, the food's a lot better.
Okay, no, I'm down. I'm down for that. Usually, yeah, I've experienced some pretty excellent cuisine and some.
That place we went to in Nashville was amazing, and that was pretty rough looking, but it was amazing. I forgot the name. Jerry, you might remember.
That's the place that
The cafeteria line behind like the wall.
Yeah, who brought us there? Matt.
Matt brought us there.
Yeah. Oh, I don't remember the name of the place. It was sketchy though. I mean, yeah, it was moderately sketchy. I don't know.
We helped the owners like clean up to like set up a birthday party for like her niece or something as we were finishing dinner.
The chicken wing place here, it was literally it was this sweet little black lady and her grandmother, and the grandmother was flirting with me the whole time. Like, this grandma's cooking. It was delicious, but it was also kind of like, they made you feel welcome. It's always those little hole in the wall places that most people overlook that are the most fun to go to.
Yeah, I mean, there's more in it that way. Like when it's a small personal place, usually the owners are probably working there, and they've got a lot invested in making sure everybody feels comfortable and enjoys themselves. So I mean, there's definitely something to that, and definitely the customers, right? If you take a look at the customers there, and they're more representative of the locals and less tourists, that's always a good giveaway.
Yeah, usually when I go somewhere new, I usually ask, where do the locals eat? And it's funny, most of the places that there's a big knife show at, you always get the same answer. Oh, well, we're not from here. We just come here to work.
That's probably about all right. Get out there and try sketchy places. Everybody, go be uncomfortable and eat your food.
I mean, obviously, you want to watch for health code violations, but
Fine, health code violations. Those letters don't mean anything. Come on. So you're traveling around internationally, being a rock star. It's fucking cool. How did that go when you got back? So you were kind of like you were a fill in, but you still know some of these guys.
yeah, I mean, you make friends throughout travels and experiences. I mean, I try to stay in contact with some people. There's a few that I can't reach anymore, whether they kind of quit and moved on to different aspects of life, or in the case of A couple of them, they've passed away. But yeah, like I moved back and decided I wanted to change coming out. And now I'm in my mid 20s. I don't know, somehow ended up moving back to Tennessee. Probably where my knife journey really begins. While playing at all these different clubs and stuff, I realized I always had a knife in my pocket. I probably had a knife in my pocket since I was 5. Now back then, you could take one to school and nobody really cared. It was normal. Most of the kids had, guns and bows in their truck. As long as the truck was locked, nobody said anything. Definitely can't do that anymore. But I realized, I'd go into the venues and they'd give it, a pat down, search you. I'd done got in the habit to take the knife out of my pocket and stick it in my boot. So as soon as I got in, I'd walk into the bathroom, pull it out of my boot, drop it in the bottom of my pocket so that I didn't have a pocket clip showing. So that's kind of where I realized I always had a knife on me. It didn't matter where I was at. So I moved back to Tennessee. Let me go one step backwards. I ended up joining Freemason Lodge in Woonsocket, Morningstar Lodge number 13. Became third degree Master Mason. Moved down here to Tennessee. Long story short, I wanted to beat this guy's head in. Found out he's a Mason, so now I can't do that. And then we ended up becoming best friends. So my friend Daniel Clifton, he started showing me all the knife groups on Facebook and stuff. Because, my mind was on music. That's all I was doing. I wasn't paying attention to the knife community itself. So he hits me up one day. He says, "Hey, we're gonna go over here. There's a knife maker out in Cleveland, Tennessee, who's having a get together at a shop." And I was like, "Yeah, man, that sounds cool." And I designed that little rhino bottle opener that I call the Noshorn. And I posted them for sale the day before, and sold out within 24 hours for the first thing I'd ever produced.
Was this during the generation era of animal shaped any tool, nook, bottle opener, pry bar?
So at the time it was Rob Bappy with the pig and what was it, Vox that had the snail. Like those were the only two. Those were the only two that was out, and then I introduced the Rhino, and I actually messaged Rob to make sure that I wasn't like stepping on his toes. But since then, like if from there it blew up and took off, and so yeah, I sold them all out. 24 hours, went out and partied way too hard, and my buddy calls me the next morning. Is like, "Hey, you still going with me to this get together?" I was like, "No, man, I'm still drunk from the night before." He's like, "You got 5 minutes. Get your pants on. You're going." All right, whatever. So we ride all the way out there. It ends up being John Graham's shop. So on the ride out, get pulled over for speeding. My buddy makes a pit stop at the liquor store. So we're taking shots of liquor all the way out there. Drink beer while we're there. I'm going through all of John's drawers, just like looking at everything. My buddy's like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "Being nosy." John ends up giving us a bottle of brandy wine that had been in a cave for like 20 years. I was like, "Here, you boys finish all this." All right. But I found myself standing in front of John's grinder. Just staring at it. And my buddy walks up and goes, "What are you doing?" I was like, "I'm going to buy one of these. I'm going to learn how to do this." And it was a year later I actually bought my first grinder.
Whoa, okay. So, hold on. So your buddy shows you the Facebook group, and you just make a bottle opener. Like how?
I decided I wanted to.
Okay, in my head, I'm like, did I miss the story of
Yeah,
like,
wait
how?
a minute, hold on.
Okay, because I was trying to recall.
How did you just make the bottle opener?
I was in the Facebook groups, hanging out, meeting people, talking to about different knives and whatnot. Became friends with Adam Romero and Nick Swan. And somewhere in that process, I decided I wanted to make something. Like, right? I didn't want to just go spend all my money on something that I could probably do out in the auto shop. Which, hindsight, don't do that. Get the right equipment. So, my buddy brings me. I had these little plates. They were like an oblong triangle, and it already had a hole cut in it. So I just kind of drew around it, and what came out with it was a rhino. And I thought, oh, rhinos are cool. I've always liked rhinos. Too bad they're going extinct. And I was like, you know what? I'll cut this up and make a rhino bottle opener. So I used an angle grinder and some hand drills and went to town. And
So you totally so all those that first batch we're talking about, you just cranked those out with just hand tools.
no, so the very first one I made with hand tools. The second one I made with hand tools that looked a hell of a lot better. In fact, there's a guy that has the prototype, the very first one I had ever made, and there's kind of like a running joke that if it ever ends up in my hands again, I'm gonna melt it down. That's how awful it is. Met this kid. His name was Edward. I can't remember his last name, but he lived in Malaysia. And after the second one, he went and cleaned it up in a CAD file for me. Sent me a CAD file. Um, runs Nashville Tactical Lounge.
Oh yeah,
Um,
Mark C. Taylor.
yeah, I sent the CAD file to him, and he hooked me up with WaterJet for my first run. So I had no idea what I was doing. I was just banking on other people.
What year was that approximately?
It'd be the end of year 9 in November. So what, 2014? November 19th, I think 2014.
So you cranked some out by hand, got it catted out, got some water jetting.
I got catted out by a guy in Malaysia
That's
that had a water jet in Nashville.
to be honest with your whole story, it kind of makes sense. So I mean, at this point, it's if it adds up, sure, okay. And these were obviously titanium.
Yeah, I did the first run in grade 2 titanium. There's still a handful of them bouncing around. I kept one for myself. I left the fly cut marks.
You make the bottle opener. You do how many batches did you do before going to John's shop? Just one?
Well, I did the titanium ones, and then I did a run of copper. I had a couple of copper pieces left, and messaged John to see if I could just come to his shop to watch and maybe ask a few questions. Interested in how fixed blades were made. And he's like, I message him on Facebook, and he was like, yeah, man, come on. So went out there and spent a day just watching. Asked a few questions here and there. A couple months later, I hit him up. I was like, hey, do you want to do maybe a collab with some of these bottle openers? He's like, yeah, come on out. We'll do that, and I can show you some more stuff on fixed blades. So
I just put
what
two
I
and two
didn't
together. Oh, why your logo is a rhino?
yeah, I'm really, really lucky that John was so welcoming and just, yeah, come to the shop. Let's do it.
Yeah, if you walked into my shop and just started opening every single one of my drawers, I'd be like, what's wrong with you?
Well, to be fair, there was probably like 50 people at his shop, so I think me opening drawers was probably the least of his worries. Cool story from that first get together. When we got there, John had some tables with stuff set out on it, and he was doing raffles. You could win. He had a couple of knives that you could win. Had some knives that you could win and pay for. A bunch of patches and all kinds of others.
Oh, so you went for a raw group get together. I thought you just went out there with your buddy.
Yeah, no, it was the first rock and roll bash. So I picked up this little knife that was sitting on the table. It was one of the ones he was giving away. It was what he calls the I-300. He made one in I think it was A2 steel, and then he made two in Damascus. I picked one up and was joking with my buddy. I was like, "Yeah, I'm gonna take this home. It's gonna be mine." I didn't know that he was giving it away, so it ended up getting raffle tickets. Well, I won the knife. I still have it. That one will never leave my collection. I think there's only been let's see, John made the three for the giveaway, one for a buddy of his, and then one that I finished. So there's only 5 of that model ever. I don't intend on ever making them. That one in particular, again, just due to that backstory.
Wow. All right. So you went there and you won something. Was that your first custom piece by anybody at that point?
First legit custom.
Okay.
So, like, the first coolest knife I ever had was a Boker Top Lock, the push button automatic.
Hmm. Yeah.
And then I guess a Boker
I,
Quaken.
I really thought you were about to say some like Packy Mascus fixed blade was your first custom.
No, there's the one I won from John. And I think the next one I got was another Grand piece. I got off of Arizona. It's actually a pink-handled Warncliffe fixed blade that my wife owns now. So after learning fixed blades from John and the Rhinos, pretty much buying most of my equipment in the shop, I did have some help from a couple of people. Cinder Johnson is not his real name, but that's his name on Facebook. He actually, I was 1 penny shy of buying my grinder, and he sent me that penny on PayPal just so I could order it.
Good friend. Okay. So at this point, you're building your own shop in your house or your.
So I was working at the auto shop, just on Noshorns, and then I started buying some stuff to build fixed blades and moved to the old auto shop, which is a big shop behind my dad's house. So I was working out of it. I'd worked there for like the first 5 years, I think. Yeah, I bought my grinder, my mill, a bunch of stuff, just selling the Rhinos, and then starting on fixed blades. Honed my grinding skills doing regrinds, which probably pissed a lot of people off, but it is what it is.
I actually remember you doing regrinds at one point.
Yeah, I look back at them now and think, fucking, nobody should have paid me.
I mean, that's good. We've talked about that before. That's a good sign of improvement. When you look back on old work and you're like, this is trash, that's good. If you looked back on it, you're like, that's not bad, it'd be like, no, you haven't gone that far. But if you look back at old work, no matter what you're doing in life, if you look back at old work and you're like, man, that is not, that's good. You want that's the good reaction. That means you're progressing.
Yeah, I look at the frame lock that's in my office. It was the first frame lock I ever made. And still, like, to this day, 10 years later, I'm always like, why did this knife make me leave college and go full time? Because it was bad.
I've got my first frame lock here, and I actually spent a lot of time on it. Other than the grinds, the rest of it turned out pretty decent. Like, after that, it was pretty awful. I look at stuff I did, 2, 3, 4 years ago, and I think that's garbage. I'm always looking to progress, always looking to push forward. There's always something new to learn.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent way to look at it. I mean, everything in a craft and everything in life, it's always, if you have an open mind to progressing and learning more and being better at whatever you're doing, I think that's the mindset that's successful and that wins.
Yeah, so after picking John's brain for a year or two on fixed blades, I got pretty decent at them. I say decent because I'm still, learning. But I was doing good enough that the shop was sustaining itself, making a little extra money. So I'd put it back into the shop, getting different materials, new equipment. And I found out Brad Blunt from JBB Knives lived. Because John was 3.5 hours away. Well, Brad lived an hour and a half away. So I messaged him and I was like, "Hey, can I come out to the shop and get your opinion?" I started designing a fixed blade, or I started designing a folder, which became the TC model. So I went out to his shop, got him to look at it, asked some questions while I was there, and he gave me some good input. And I made one out of plastic to take out there to show him. So when I got back home, still making some fixed blades. At this time, I'm still working at the auto shop that my dad owns. I was working there full time, doing the knives at night. So I was basically working 6 to 8 hours during the day at the auto shop, then 6 to 8 hours at night at the knife shop, and then I'd work 6 to 8 hours on Saturday in the knife shop. And then Saturday night, I'd go to the bar and drink. I get some good input. Well, when I finally decided to build my first folder, I started messaging Stephen Carroll because I just found out that he lived close to where I did in Rhode Island. So I got some good input on screw sizing, pivot sizing, and all that stuff. Sparking a good friendship from him. Bought a folder from him, which was, I guess, my first legit custom folder. It was one of his fatty models. So for years, I had pestered him to build me one of his fatty models with a flipper tab, and he told me to build it myself. So I sat down. I didn't want to build the same thing that he did. I started designing and redesigning, and put my logo into perspective with it, and I ended up getting what I called the Fat Boy, which I have now downsized a little to make it the Gents Fat. Same story with John Graham. I've pestered him for years to build me a Rhino GT, and he always told me to build it myself. Yeah, I mean, it worked out. Like I said, I've been real lucky between John, Brad, Steven, Richard Rogers has answered a few questions. Burnley has answered a few questions. And honestly, in the last several years, if it wasn't for Chuck, I probably wouldn't have pushed my skills to where they're at. Chuck got on the Kentucky show, and he had the table right beside me. And the very first knife he sat down at his table caught my eye, so I ended up buying it and taking it home with me. From then, we just messaged him here and there, and we ended up becoming friends. I guess eventually I pestered him enough. He let me come stay at his house for a week and taught me how to make slip joints, and then that kind of transitioned me from just a frame lock, liner lock, and fixed blade guy to now I can do slip joints. But then I'm seeing stuff from Chuck's perspective, which is more art world stuff. So I started moving that direction. Like, not my overall goal isn't to go 100% art, but I want to be able to use some of those details with what I do. I mean, there's so many different avenues in this industry. Like, there's guys that only make fixed blades. There's guys that only do forging. I have no desire to do any forging. The repetitive hammering seems like it would get old after a while. Also, don't understand how they make money with as much time. It's an awesome art form. I'm glad they can do it. But then there's, the slip joint world is completely different. The art world is vastly different within the different subsections in the art world. So this craft isn't just like tactical frame locks. It isn't just frame locks. It isn't just folders, or it isn't just fixed blades. There's so many different aspects of it, and I'd like to grasp at different pieces to not necessarily make something new because it's all been done, but make something different, something that stands out.
We've talked about that before on the podcast here, and certainly I think that John is a great example of that. Like, I could see from across the room, I could see a custom Graham piece, and I could go, oh, that's like, I know who made that. Like, easy. Like, that's okay. So I mean, there's the distinctive style, like developing that style. Like, it takes.
So something Brad told me early on when I was at his shop. He said, one of the things I strive for is to be able to build a knife, not put my logo on it, and you still know it's mine. So that I've tried to keep that in the back of my head as I design new things and progress through this.
Yeah, I mean, I've talked to some people about that theory of just like, I shouldn't have to like logo something, you should just know it's mine kind of thing. And that works. Sometimes it works well. Sometimes it works with a maker, and they nail it, and they have an aesthetic style that is highly recognizable, and they can thread that needle through different models easily, and it's representative of that. Like, I certainly I see John's work like that. I see some of the knives that Nick makes are definitely like that. He's got like a certain aesthetic styling. When I look at Chuck's work, like, it's very similar. Like, I can see like, oh, like okay, I can see that needle that moves through the pieces. Like they all have a same sort of spiritual maker quality. Like, and sometimes you got to be careful because I think some makers pigeonhole themselves with certain models, and it's hard to work out of that. And not to their detriment at all. They build an entire career on that. Like I look at Chuck and I go, that's a classical knife maker. He can make whatever he wants and just sort of move through it like easily. And I definitely see like the gents fat boy, like the more of your work I handle and purchase, like I see that model, I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. Like that's for me, that's recognizable as across the room. Oh, like that's Kirk's knife. Like I get that.
So I mean that's the goal. But for any new maker, I'd suggest even if you get to the point that you don't have to put a logo on it, put a logo on there. Uh, Eventually, people are gonna pass on and not know who you are. So if your logo's on there, at least it can be traced.
Yes. I also, as the dealer side of me, I will happily reject any knife that someone tries to sell me without a logo on it. I'm sorry, it's no go. Like you're not Picasso. You're not, it's just not. You got to sign the work. Even Homer. Homer's got a signature built into his face. It's just the way it works. Matt Groening saw that. So you can always hide. There's ways to logo a knife on the DL, right? Like Chuck does it on the inside spacer of the Bally song, or sometimes you can put it on the interior tang of the blade. There's lots of places you can sneak it, so you got to look for it. But still, yes, these items that are created by men will outlive the men that created them. And at some point, it's be very good to trace the origin of these things back to those people.
And to that point, like I think that's what drives me to keep going and keep progressing. Is like it is a legacy. These Every piece I've ever made or every piece I will make will definitely outlast me.
Yeah. No, I mean it's absolutely true. These tools, no matter what, will the materials themselves, they're not going anywhere. I mean, even if time and rust and age, eat away at them, the frames will still outlast the bones that make us. That's an easy one, right? Um, and I mean, I think it's a great thing to strive towards. Sort of working with Chuck on the finer details of the art side. I think that's an excellent way to do it. Tell us a little bit about your development um, with John over the years, because you guys spent some serious time together.
Yeah. So what started out as me just going to the shop to hang out and watch, maybe ask a few questions. Uh, Turned into a friendship with his son, Junior. Um, so me, John, and Junior collabed on some of these rhinos over the years, and then you know that led to a friendship with John himself. So basically, like every show, John was like my dad at the show, right? So in the pit at Blade Show, he'd get ready to go to bed. He'd stand up. He'd walk past me, either say goodnight or point to me. Like that was my cue. It's time to get to bed, kid. We got work in the morning. He'd make sure that I went and ate after the show. So every Friday in Atlanta, we always went to Fogo de Chao. It's like an every year thing. Um, so it ended up being this like almost like a father figure type connection with John.
Wow. I mean, that's a special thing to have. Knife shows can be very intimidating if you feel like you're on the outside anyway. Feeling like you're on the inside is even better, and then having somebody like that looking out for you, it can mean the world.
Oh, definitely, changed it for me. Like I look back at it, I probably would have drank too much and not showed up on Saturday. um, so it definitely gave me, I guess, a leg up on being more professional rather than soaking it in the rock star life aspect of it.
Now, did you? So he mentored you both in knife making and at the shows. Did you share table space? You had collaborations together. I mean,
We've done a couple of collabs on a folder, which we call the Rhino Koenig. It's basically his Rhino blade shape shoved into my Koenig frame, and John made two. We started two more right about the time that he got diagnosed with cancer. I ended up finishing those afterwards. Other than that, we've collabed on a couple of the model openers, and I just kind of goofed off and hung out all the time. Like I would take trips out to John's house to a shop on the weekend just to hang out, just because I could. I'd learn more stuff.
right. Then you have a friend who's also like pouring out their knowledge for you to absorb. I mean, that's intense, man.
I'm honestly super grateful for it. Like, there's finer details in this craft that probably wouldn't have learned as fast as I did had it not been for John. Um, Different ways of, you know, posting them for sale, or uh, different ways of naming them. Little when you go to grind it, change your lean angle just a little bit to feather into a certain spot, or
There's a lot of minute details and how you could do a lot of things. I remember I was talking to Rob Carter once, and he was telling me he was doing something, and I was like, "Oh, that's an interesting way to do it." He's like, "I taught him how to do that," and I was like, "I've never done it that way." And I started thinking about it. I was like, "Oh yeah, I haven't done it like that in ages. I forgot about that technique." And I brought it back. But like, yeah, there's a lot of different ways to do it without someone showing you or seeing it. Like, even stuff that's like, "Oh yeah, that's common sense." Sometimes it's not common.
well, see, I've been lucky. I've been to John's shop. I've been to Brad's shop. Did a couple of collabs with Brad. Went to Chuck's shop. Did collabs with Chuck. So three different shops, and I can tell you there's differences in each of them and how they do certain things. Now, if I can take that and use something they do different than I do, and it ends up being better, well, that just makes me better in the long run. So I've been lucky to be able to nitpick from different people, uh, different ways that they go about doing things, and then meld that into my own way, my own process.
Yeah, like the hybridizing of different methods, different skills, like that's the way things get better, I think. Like the sharing of information generally doesn't hurt. And then right, you discover how someone else does it, and then you do it, and then you combine those things together, and you're like, oh, this is the way I prefer to do it. Slash, it might be the better way to do it.
So John always nailed it in my head. I had to learn how to grind by hand. No jigs, no nothing, just grind by hand. So I started learning that. I got pretty decent at it. I went to Brad's shop, and Brad was grinding using a jig. And I saw the pros and cons in both. And then I went to Chuck's. Chuck does it by hand, but he's got a different tool to hold the blade. So I kind of blended all those together, and depending on what I'm grinding and how I'm grinding it, depends on the setup I use. So for like the Gents Fat Boy, I grind the main bevel with a jig to set the bevel. Then I come back and finish it by hand because the sweep at the tip is different, and I can't produce that using just a jig by itself.
Okay, so that's actually a pretty tricky grind on that.
It's just a weird sweep at that tip. It's such a short, but another thing, like I just did this Warncliffe. Well, I can grind that whole blade on the jig itself. The jig holds it straight. As long as I'm not gouging into it, I can keep all the grind straight. The TC, for instance, is a 4-inch blade, and I just grind that whole thing by hand just because it's big enough to hold on to. So there's like subtle differences in there's subtle differences between hand grinding and jig grinding. There's pros and cons to both. I take advantage of the pros on both ends.
Yeah, jig grinding locks you into very linear work, and if you have very soupy grinds like recurves or very high pointed knives, or just something that has multiple angles or needs a lot of motion, that's where you can't get away with a jig sometimes, or you have to do multiple setups or get really creative and make custom tooling.
Yeah, jig grinding's very non-organic. So like you hand grind, you can do some sweepy feather grinds and uh, stuff you can't do on a mechanical setup. That's basically just. So I learned that the way John shaped his handles is completely different than the way Chuck does his, and I take the best of both worlds. Um, Again, I'm always constantly learning, and the more people I can learn from, the better. I don't see how it can hurt.
Yeah, no, that's highly logical. I mean, just again, always being a sponge for information. That's the way to improve, and that's the way to get better at what you're doing. Um, so since Chuck is here, how was the trip to Chuck's? What did you guys work on?
Uh, Trip was awesome. I flew out of Nashville into Boston. He picked me up. Um, we built seven, I think it was seven, slip joints in like 3 or 4 days. Went to a baseball game. Stopped at a little dive bar that had deer heads all over the place, so I kind of felt at home.
Is that place in Worcester?
Yes, Vincent's.
Yes, that's definitely the place he took
Vincent's.
us.
Okay.
Yeah, like never built a slip joint before. Didn't know you know, anything about setting the timing or the tension. Watch Chuck go through that first one, and then he's like, "Yeah, go do it." Okay. Luckily, they turned out pretty good.
So you did slip joints with Chuck, figuring out the timing, and so they were collab fully. So the slip joint mechanism, and then what'd you guys do? Split the grinding and the blades? How did it work? How did it pan out?
To be honest, it started as one thing and then ended up as another. It's just he would do one process, I would do another, and we just kind of rotate through them all. But Chuck has definitely got a system that most makers don't have. So Chuck can work on 10 lives, do all the same process on all 10 of them, and then go to the next process on all 10, on the next process on all 10. But he's fast at it because he's been doing it long enough. He's learned a routine and a system where, yeah, they can be different models, but you're doing all the same process. So you just kind of work them in together. Where, like, John had a system when it came to fixed blades, he would grind all 10 fixed blades and then he would glue up like three of them while working on sheaths for three of them rather than do all 10 through every step of the process. And me, I am probably the worst at setting up a process. So I just kind of went all like willy nilly. Like, well, for instance, getting ready for my first blade show, I built a hand cut every single piece for every single knife. And I think I ended up taking 17 folders with me. I ended up taking one off the table because I had an issue, but fixed it later on. Anyway, so I cut all the blades. I cut one side, like the show side frame, just to set the timing on the blade. Sent all the blades off for heat treat. Then I grabbed three of them, cut the locks, made the lock side, got the knife put together, set it to the side, started three new ones. Rather than taking those six and working on one process through all of them, I probably would have got done in half the time had I done it Chuck's way. I spent 3 months building knives for, of course, again, I was working part time, but I spent 3 months building knives for my first blade show, which to build that same amount now would definitely take me half, if not less than half.
So what year was your first blade show?
You gotta ask that. I don't remember. Um, 7 years ago, minus 1 year because of COVID lockdown. I think that's right.
So you've been to a couple though. You've been down this road before.
Yeah, I can no longer do the new maker
Okay.
class.
All right. There we go. All right. I mean, yeah, exactly. Slip joints, adding that to the repertoire, and the processes involved. Like, I think batch work is when you talk to guys about doing batch work, it's like sometimes a light goes off. Like maybe they never thought about it, and sometimes everyone does batch work maybe a different way, and they don't necessarily think about doing it in batches like that. But I mean, I feel like it makes the most sense, especially if you can get like a rhythm down. It seems like the most efficient way to get it done. I mean, like you said, cutting the
Well,
time in half.
for me, it's definitely the most efficient way. Um, I and I struggle with this even now. I like to focus all of my energy on one knife at a time. Spend as much time on that individual knife to make it as perfect as I can for the moment at my skill set. Uh, they don't really work out too well when you're trying to do this for a living, though. Like, yeah, because you have to be fast. And to be fast, you can't spend as much time focusing on certain things. So now I've gotten to the point where I try to do so many at the same time, but then when shows come around, I'll build a handful of them all at the same time and then spend a lot of time on just one. Um, for instance, I made a knife for a Kentucky Knife Show several years ago, or a couple of years ago, that I spent 2 months on.
That's an incredible amount of time.
Well, I had to make 4 different tools and teach myself a bunch of different stuff to make it work.
Was that the multi-scaled? I think was that the. I think I might have seen that.
Multi-scale hidden hardware. I remember him posting pictures
Yeah.
in the private group about it throughout the weeks.
Yeah, it was copper bolstered, Mokatai scaled with a zirconium lower bolster, zirconium pocket clip, floating copper backspacer, and all hidden hardware, with the exception of the pivot. The pivot was still showing. Uh, on the copper bolster, I did an old Japanese Suba carving technique, which I had to make 2 different tools just to do that. And I had to make a tool to put the screws in from the inside, had to modify some uh, tweezers just to be able to reach in and set the screws down in it. It was like a mosaic artsy style build. That was kind of like my initial journey into the art world.
That's like stepping it up to the next level kind of thing.
Oh yeah, definitely from what I was making before to that. That's a major difference.
Hidden hardware. I mean, that's like a whole thing unto itself. That's like secret wizardry.
It's not that difficult once you figure it out, but there are a couple of things you have to keep in mind while doing it. Obviously, your scale thickness, your drill depth and tap depth on the inside, so that you go to sand it, you don't break through and show the screw. And once you figure it out, it's not rocket science. None of this is rocket science.
It's just about figuring it out. That's the trick, right? Paying attention, like in inspecting work. But I see a lot of makers do
Asking
that.
the right
Yeah.
questions, asking the right questions to the right people.
Trying to figure out who the right people are. That's right. That's the third thing. Who's the right people to ask these questions to?
There was one point in the industry where hidden hardware was like a black magic tight knit secret, where you see people do it, and then you ask them how did they do that, and they're like, I don't know. Or it's like the guy that taught me told me not to tell anybody. It was like a few years of that, I remember.
Yeah. Like you're not supposed to tell anybody, but you, yeah, it's right. like Kirk said, it's not rocket science. You can figure it out if you're paying close enough attention. Um, it's not crazy.
It does take a little mechanical ingenuity to kind of figure some of it out if you're going to figure it out on your own. But like me, like I said, I've been lucky on getting information from the people I did. Part of that is just asking and not being afraid to be told no or kick rocks. You might get told no 3, 4, 5 times, and then all of a sudden, like, yeah, I'll let you in on this secret.
Do you feel like some of that's just persistent?
And I've been in a lot of different uh, communities, and it's that way everywhere. It don't matter what it is. Um, Everybody likes to feel like they've got a one up on somebody else, and honestly, like I said, you can either be annoying enough that they eventually tell you, or you ask enough people to get the correct answers.
Or you've demonstrated that you've put in enough of the work on your own and you've gotten to a point where you're stuck, and I'm more than happy to help lead you down the right path as opposed to just giving you the answer. But if you just come out and say, oh, hey, how do you do this? Well, if you haven't put in the work ahead of time to try to figure it out on your own, then I'm not just going to tell you.
Yeah, that's why Chuck took me in. I worked hard enough, but couldn't quite get ahead. I mean, a lot of it, you have to show that you want it. I mean, it's not like for somebody to message me and be like, "Hey, how do I get in the music industry?" I'm like, I don't know what to tell you. You have to want it. You have to put the effort in to get recognized. And it's the same with the knife community. Like, you know, November 19th, I start my 10th year. Um, you know, been a long road to get to this point. Uh, just having the desire to want to do this. And I think part of my desire is I just love the creativity and the art behind it, and it's a functional tool. November 19th is when I launched the Rhinos for the first time. Then November 19th is when my daughter was born. It was also the day that I told my dad that I was no longer working at the auto shop, and I'll give him till the end of the year. Uh, 3 years ago, and then well, I guess it'd be 4 years in November. Worked at the auto shop until Christmas and didn't go back. Took a major leap. It's a dumb move when you have a newborn.
It's another good note, those listeners out there.
I mean, it worked out, but again, I put the effort forward and spent the time, paying my dues and learning.
Which is absolutely crucial in any. You're absolutely right, in any industry or craft or anything you're doing, right? If no one's gonna give a shit unless you're basically sweating and bleeding and like, all right, that looks like you're serious about this, which is good. There should be a bar, there should be a threshold in every industry, and I think that knife making deserves to have that threshold, because I think there are a lot of people that sort of flow in and flow out in a very casual manner, while the rest of us are here, making a living, taking this craft seriously, and putting in that time. And I think it's important to have that bar set relatively high. Like, this is something that a lot of people take seriously.
This is the only industry I've been a part of that people come in that have never made a knife before and can sell one for a crazy amount of money, and then disappear, within a year, 2 years.
Well, it's interesting that you bring this up because in a lot of other professional fields, the older you are, the more experience you have, the more you're valuable and the more money you make. But in this industry, the new person who's the hot new maker tends to sell knives faster than someone who's been doing it for twice as long or even longer than them. And I've never understood that.
I think, Chuck, that's an excellent point, but I do think that that's a recent development. I think that's in the last 5 years. I mean, I think popular makers have always kind of sprung onto the scene, but I think, and I hate.
At least the
All
last
right,
decade.
fair enough. I mean, like, I blame
At
social
least,
media.
and I say that because I was a collector before I became a maker. Um, you know, spent 2 3 years just kind of sitting in the shadows, making friends, watching people make stuff, and it was definitely though at the time, at the time you had to have thick skin to be in some of these groups, and I kind of miss those days. But it was definitely cliques and within different groups that I don't see those cliques anymore the way they were. Um, but there's definitely a hype with certain makers or certain things that is beyond my understanding. Some of them are cool, but I don't fully grasp why they're that cool.
I think that some of those things are hard for a lot of us to grasp the popularity of either the pieces or the people, but that's just part of one of those things. But I think that you're right. I think in the last decade, and we'll digress on the old man angry about social media thing there for a minute. But I think that Facebook and Instagram are powerful things that have helped and hindered probably lots of things, but the knife industry certainly is the first thing that comes to mind. Which is it's great that it exists because I think a lot of people flourish because of it, and I think that in a lot of ways the exposure that it brings is such an intense overflow sometimes of information and and flexing. I think is definitely a thing in the knife industry that is it happens. Um, but again, I digress on an angry person social media things. Um,
Just because it's been years, I'm just gonna say it.
you mother!
Times were
I knew you were gonna say it.
times were different before the Instagrams.
No kidding, times were different. Sure. So, all right. So, Kirk, so you're in it now. Like you're when was the moment? This is a question that passed. When was the moment you went full time? Where you said this is it? Like I'm fully committed, and there's nothing else on the side. It's just knife making.
Uh, December, I guess Christmas of 2019. So at the time, I was working full time at the auto shop, and then part time at the knife shop, and I was living at Hamilton Place, which is an old antebellum home in Mount Pleasant, Tennessee, as a caretaker. So I was watching over the grounds, make sure nobody stole anything, nothing got broke. If it was broke, fix it. Um, that sort of stuff. So basically, I was working 3 jobs. Uh, Found out we were having a kid, and then realized I couldn't work that much and have a kid. So I'd never be in the house. I'd constantly be working and miss her growing up. So I made a choice and said, worst case scenario, knives don't work out. I can always go back to the auto shop. So quit everything and gave it my all for the knife business. I've been lucky. I've been busy. Moved, bought a house. Still buying stuff for the shop. So, without the fan base or the customer base, I would not be where I'm at, and I'm super gracious to be in this position.
Hmm. I mean, yeah, I think that's awesome. Those are huge life steps and certainly steps in the knife game. Um, so how do you handle the orders thing? No orders, orders? Did you start out taking orders and now you're just kind of books are closed?
So I was taking orders for a long time, and John actually always fussed at me. He's like, "Don't take orders. Just build what you want to." I was like, "Well, I'm trying to get my name out there. I'm trying to make sure business can stay consistent." Um, so I had a pretty long order list, and I mean it's still fairly long. But I quit taking orders, and I still take maybe 5 to 10 in a year, depending on how the year's going. But for the most part, Now I just try to focus on building what I want to build and um, you know, fill in some orders here and there just to make sure cash flow is still good. I think it's the best of both worlds because you're not completely cutting off new people, um, or old um, customers that continuously want to get something new, but you're also allowing yourself to progress as a maker and be creative rather than getting stuck building the same thing over and over.
Do you think it's interesting, or do you enjoy or disenjoy? I mean, I guess that's a rough question to answer, but like when somebody talks to you about an order and they have an idea about how they want to see one of your knives dressed, is that weird sometimes? Like you're just like, well, that's like, how do you handle that? Uh,
It's only weird if the materials they're asking for don't flow, right? So as long as the materials will work together and and the picture that they're building that I'm trying to piece together seems like it'll look good, then cool, man, I'm all for it. If it doesn't seem like it's gonna work, I try to like point them in the right direction, and most of the time they're like, "Oh yeah, no, I get what you're saying. That'd be even better."
how did you get mixed up with the Kentucky guys? Like that seems like a interesting group of individuals bonded around a knife show started in a parking lot.
Yeah, it started as a get together. I got invited up to the get together. This was back in the USN days. The get together then was at a Mexican restaurant. Yeah, on the forums, not the show in Vegas, but I was at a Mexican restaurant out of all places, and went to a couple of those, and that show, or I guess at the time that get together was just a bunch of people in the Tennessee, Kentucky area that all kind of knew each other and hung out, and slowly progressed into what it is now, which is a whole beast on its own.
It's definitely changed from what it used to be then. That's for sure. It's a great format for a show. It's tight, it's quick, and it seems like pretty enjoyable for attendees and for makers.
Yeah, it's a good location. Right there in Bourbon Country. There's a lot to see, a lot to do. Lexington's pretty busy. You got the comedy club right there, some good food right in the area, and again, it's a quick show, so it's like a lot of people show up and hang out the whole weekend, but the show's only like 4 hours, so you're not having to. It's more personal, right? You're not standing behind the same table for 3 days, seeing however many people come past you at Blade Show. It's a limited number of tickets, 4 hour show. Everybody knows everybody else, and when the show's done, before or after the show, you can just sit down and hang out, talk to your favorite maker, talk to you know friends that you've known forever. Whereas some of these bigger shows, it's so busy and there's so many people, it's hard to make those
Mm.
connections.
What is your show circuit like these days? Do you do all of them?
So I do Blade Show Texas, Blade Show Atlanta, and Kentucky. I'll be picking up a fourth show next year, and I'm not exactly sure which one it's going to be yet. Probably Blade West.
Getting out to more shows is never a bad thing, right? Like the more shows, the merrier. It's fun to see people. I mean, as long as you don't get too overwhelmed with building, um, it is nice to hang out with birds of a feather, right? And obviously see friends at the show who are customers. Um, no one's ever gonna be bummed that they went to too many knife shows.
Well, I went to Blade Show Atlanta a couple of years as a collector, and it's vastly different when you're a maker. There's so much more work and prep time that goes into just building a knife, but you also have to plan travel and lodging and all that extra stuff. So to take on a fourth show, I'm adding to the workload. But uh, as far as it goes, I get to go out to the West Coast and maybe pick up some new customers that have never heard of me, never met me, whatever it be. Um, and that's kind of you know between Facebook and Instagram, you can reach everywhere, but it's those personal connections that last the longest. So shows really aren't they're I mean they're about the knives. They're about making some money, but for 90% of it, it's just meeting people, meeting new faces, talking to people, making new friendships, making new connections in the industry, whatever aspect it is for that moment, that day. Um, it's more about the people and a gathering event than it is the knives themselves. At least I think it is.
No, I think that's absolutely well said. Right. Knife shows not necessarily about the knives, it's about the community. It really is.
I've made some lifelong, well, what I would consider lifelong friends at this point. Although I might get under Chuck's skin at some point and he'll quit talking to me, but
Lifelong friends. 10 minutes
no,
later,
I've
don't
made
talk to me.
I've made some really good friends that I talk to on a regular basis. I talk to Chuck all the time. Used to talk to John all the time. There's I got friends in Germany. You got friends in Alaska. I've got friends everywhere. That in Malaysia. The guy that helped me make my first CAD. I would have never met people that were this friendly had it not been for just saying, yeah, let's try this. Let's get into the knife game.
So let's get back to some of the work you've been doing. So what's your plan right now with the gram knives? You plan on incorporating them into your lineup or making modified versions, or?
And I'm just trying to keep the Graham name alive. Uh, like I said, I'm super thankful John had taught me everything he did, helped me get to where I was, where I am, um, and became such close with him. When he passed, he left his patterns to me. Brenda actually owns Graham Knives. She bought it from him. So everything on the production side, she's going to take care of as far as like CRKT stuff goes, or MechForce, or whatever future production models. I'm gonna like I've told her, I'll help her build whatever she needs to send to these companies. Um, and on the custom side, John left his patterns for me to build. Um, there's a bunch of them, and I think I counted like 172 fixed blades. And that Yeah, and as far as folders go, there's parts to folders that I've never seen before, so I'm trying to piece those together. Um, but yeah, no, my he wouldn't want me to not focus on my stuff. Um, so I'm still doing my own thing. Still I just released a new model like a week or two ago, but I'm in between builds. I'll fill in some of his or customers that I know had already had orders with John, trying to knock some of those out. But John's waiting list was like 10 years long, so I don't know. Like he kept a record for a while and then like deleted it off his computer, so I don't know what all's out there. So it's basically I'm just getting messages here and there, like, hey, I had this on order. I'm like, oh, all right, well, let me get it in line for you. Really, it's just about keeping the legacy alive. Like John had a whole different view on what a knife could be. He had his own style. Like anybody that sees that razor blade knows it was John's. Um, so just as a thank you back to him, like for me to build one every so often or a handful of them at a time. It's just for me, it's a way to say, hey, thanks for taking me under your wing and doing everything you did.
That I've had many razors throughout my collecting career. I pretty much owned all the production stuff back in the day. Had some customs, all the mid techs that he ran. The Razel concept, it's very interesting to me. Everything in this industry, in every industry, everything is copied, replicated, duplicated, or inspired from. The Razel's the only thing I've ever seen that it stayed with the maker. It's never really been duplicated, replicated, or inspired from. Like, it was just him.
There's been people try to make a couple, but they never really went anywhere. But John was able to make it big and continue continue it going on. I know there was one that was sold as a door breaker that had the basic Razel shape, and then you've got people that do reverse Tontos that were trying to do the Razel shape but didn't want to do the Razel shape. Like I said, was kind of my understanding whenever I first learned about the Razel. But it's kind of interesting that that whole Razel blade shape. John, he was in the Air Force. When he got out of the Air Force, became a diesel mechanic. So a lot of diesel techs or automotive techs use a cold chisel to scrape gasket material off or hammer through stuff. So he kind of blended a straight razor and a cold chisel, and the utility of that blade is amazing. Everything from opening packages to you go to put a new doorknob on, and if you've got to cut a section of the door out, you just hammer on it like it's a cold chisel, and boom, you got section cut out. So it's a very versatile blade, and you have 2 points of penetration versus where most blades you only have one. So yeah, I mean it's kind of became its own iconic thing. I didn't want to see it end, so I'm gonna try to keep it going, build some of his as I go along, and build my own stuff.
That's commendable in many different shapes and forms. Not only for the legacy, because I think that the legacy is crucial, right? Like the person that was the maker and the designs. One of those things has passed, but both of them don't have to pass. One of them can continue, and that can continue through your hands in a custom way, which I think is phenomenal because a great way to remember the person who made the things is through the things themselves. So definitely balancing your own work with working on some of the patterns you got that were John's, who is your friend and mentor. Yeah, I mean, as a human being, I think that's a pretty fucking outstanding.
I mean, it's the least I could do as a.
And speaking of yours and John's work, you ever gonna finish grinding that sword?
Those swords were designed after John. I did base it off of I did base it off the Rhino Koenig blade shape, or I guess the Rhino Stubby GL. Kind of based it off of that blade shape, and the handle shape came from one of his. I think it was a SS7, a big old 7-inch fixed blade. So I kind of pieced a couple of different things together. I've got one that is about 3/4 ground. They're a pain. One of them's 12 inches long. The other one's or blade length. One's 12 inches, and the other one's 18.
It's a fun grind. So I ground one sword. I've yet to finish it. It's been kicking around for way too many years.
Well, I keep going back and forth between like a compound grind. Like John did some crazy compound grinds. I don't know if you guys have ever like actually looked at some of his wild grinds, but he did some that were like hollow in one section, Scandi grind in another, hollow again, Scandi grind again, and then that iconic Razor tip. So I'm kind of debating on this 18-inch if I want to do that same thing or if I want to do it on this 12-inch. So I started Scandi grinding to get it all down to the thinness I wanted, and marked it out where I was going to do hollows. But the more I grind on this thing, the more I'm like, this is a task. It's a lot of work, and it's so big that like I can't put it in a jig to make sure I can grind certain sections straight. So I'm having to do all of it by hand.
No, it's supporting the whole thing. Like, I have no idea how swordsmiths and the forger guys that do swords grinding with your arms fully extended out. Like, I don't know. When I ground this one, I used the work rest as my rest, and I tilted the blade and I slid it down the work rest because I was like I couldn't grind with my arms so spread apart. I'm used to folders, so my hands are tight next to each other.
So I'm grinding it in 3-inch sections and then blending them all together. It's a little easier because you only have to focus on a certain portion and you're moving your arms normally the same length. But it's still a pain because you have to eventually blend them all, which means you have to run the whole length.
Yeah, a bunch of little grinds blended together. Like that's, yeah, good on you. That's, yeah, wow.
We'll see if let's see if I ever get them finished or they end up in a trash pile.
Well, that's the fun of it all. And see how the project turns out, sharp or otherwise. Yeah, I mean certainly it's a task.
So yeah, not only am I did John leave his patterns, and I'm trying to keep the legacy alive, but I ended up buying most of the equipment out of his shop. So that first grinder that I stared at, and my buddy asked me what I was doing, I was like, I'm gonna buy one of these. Well, I ended up buying that exact grinder, and I'm now grinding blades with it, which was John's old one.
That's a trip, man. Yeah. Okay. Speaking of things coming full circle, okay. Jeez.
Yeah. I bought the surface grinder from John. They used to be Tom Crine's.
Hmm.
Kind of crazy that it ended up here.
Wow. So wow. Okay, so that's even more getting the tools that. Yeah. Okay. That's deep, actually. Getting the tools that the original things were made on, that now you're continuing the legacy of building those things on the same tools that the original ones were made on. Okay.
Yeah, and oddly enough, like I've tried grinding John's on my grinder, and the finish comes out different. And it's not necessarily like the grinds are different themselves, but like the finish on the blade is completely different on his grinder versus mine. So my grinder is a 220. It's got a little more oomph behind it, or John's is a 110. So you kind of have to be more gentle. You can't put a lot of force into it, or it starts to bog down. But I've noticed it makes a difference in the way the finish work itself comes out.
It just somehow it knows. The universe is aware that it's the incorrect grinder. You're continuing the legacy. You're sort of building it, will trying to catch up sometimes with orders as they maybe claim to have in the previous book. But people can't really like call you to have like you're not taking orders for any of John's patterns, right?
Not necessarily. Like I said, if I know it's one of his main collectors, um, I'll try to fit them in. It's like I just built 4 that I sent to Canada, and that guy collected a lot of John stuff. He had 2 knives that were already on order with John, so I finished those, and then he ordered 2 more, so I went ahead and built them. Um, one of those turned into a headache because it was hidden screws, and then I had to build a whole nother tool to mail it to him so he could put it together, because now you can't ship knives to Canada whole. They have to be in pieces. So you know, there's things like that where like I'll make an exception. Like, yeah, you supported John. I knew you supported John before all of this, so I'll fit you in when I can.
That's good. I think that's a right. I would call that a pre-qualifier, right? Somebody who's somebody's already been in it, and it's not just for some weird flip or some weird thing they saw on Instagram.
Yeah, because honestly, like right now, that's at least the last year and a half. That's been the biggest thing. Is like I refused a lot of people because I was afraid they were going to flip just to take advantage of the
Hmm.
situation.
Hmm.
Um,
Well, I think that's
but
that's good on
there was
you.
still a handful of people. There was still a handful of people I built for because I knew they were legit.
Yeah. I mean, you know, it's yeah. Gatekeeping that legacy is that's a lot to go on one person. So it's good that you knew him well enough and knew some of his clientele in this case to be selective because I don't think that it's a bad thing to be the gatekeeper of that. Better it to be someone such as yourself than someone who had profit in mind. But better to be true to the person.
And watching John go through his battle with cancer, and then telling me he was going to pass the legacy down made me think, or pass his patterns down. That it made me wanna build his. Like he was fully of like, no, don't build mine. Focus on your own stuff. Um, but it made me want to build them so I keep the legacy alive. But that also made me think about my knives or you know, any of my other friends. Like if something happened, like are they just going to end? Because most makers they just end. They don't move on, go anywhere else. And for John to have that yeah, I'm gonna pass the patterns to you, kind of kind of lit a fire to be like, all right, I'm gonna build these, but I'm not gonna make them everything. I don't want them to. He didn't want them to take away from what I was doing, but I still want to pay my dues, pay my respect, and as the ultimate thank you, keep the name going. Because there's been since I've been in, there's been makers that have either passed or just quit making that you never hear about anymore.
Yeah, no, people do come and go. It's an unfortunate thing. Knife making is there's no insurance and securities involved. It can be very tricky to be on the up and up and then take a whole shit ton of pre-orders and just vaporize into thin air. That's a pretty unfortunate common one. Yeah. Well, that's awesome, dude. I mean, definitely look forward to seeing the future of that and how that evolves over time and and the customs that you make from that. It's it sounds like it's just kind of it's getting rolling, right? You're getting into it, and it sounds like something that you're gonna keep going with.
Yeah, and I've made several that people have messaged me after they received them. Like, dude, if I didn't know you made this, I would have thought it was John's. And I think that for me, that's like one of the ultimate compliments to build his knife so that it ends up looking like his, right? Instead of it being my work on his design, which kind of what I'm going to do moving forward is kind of blending my own style with his. That's why we set up the new logo. But when I finished out the orders, I tried to do them like the way John would have done them, so that it looked like his. And to have people tell me that I nailed it is, that was pretty
Yeah.
neat.
No, I think you're absolutely right. That's the ultimate compliment when someone gets something and there's no discernible line and they believe it to be his work, but it's yours. Yeah, that's pretty nice. Absolutely. Yeah. Um. Hmm. No, that really is. It's a lot, man, and good on you for taking all that on. That's intense.
Yeah, I mean, emotionally they're kind of tough. Like I said, he was like a father figure, so each one kind of hits me in the feels every time I build one.
I could only imagine. Yeah. So what's next? So you're thinking about adding Blade Show. Uh, but otherwise you do Kentucky and you do regular Blade Show.
Yep, Blade Atlanta, Blade Texas, and Kentucky. Possibly picking up a fourth show. Thinking about Blade West. I've got. I just released a new Warncliffe. I'm working on a new Spear Point, which I don't know if I've told anybody yet. Um, Got a couple other things behind the scenes, which I don't know if I can talk about yet. But those should come out soon. Chuck knows what I'm
Uh-oh.
talking about.
Top secret squirrel stuff. What Kirk, what's the best way to keep an eye on what you're doing? Facebook group, Instagram?
Uh, Honestly, the best way if people want to watch, the work in progress on different knives, you kind of get a behind the scenes look of how things look through the different stages, or whatever I'm doing or trying something new. The best way to do that is closed Facebook group, KM Designs. Other than that, I'll post on Instagram periodically. I actually need to get better at Instagram, and that's just at Kirk Mayberry, and it's also linked directly to my um, Facebook business page. So whatever's posted on Instagram is posted on the Facebook business page.
Nice. Okay. So people can jump on there, keep an eye on what's going on, but really get their ass out to the show and say hi and support in person is always the best way to do it.
Yeah, man, come hang out. Let's
That's
have a
it.
beer, chat.
Come on out. Come out to a knife show.
It's always interesting. It's always interesting when I'm around. Something is always happening. Something crazy.
Stealing my damn jacket. God.
That jacket was awesome.
Okay, gotta get you one.
I got so many compliments. Dude, I got so many compliments on that thing.
It was pretty legit.
Yeah, or you end up on the rooftop in Texas.
Yeah, Texas show. We were hanging out in the pit, and the security guard. It was late, but everybody was going to bed. The security guard showed up and asked us if we wanted to go on the roof. So started off as 16 of us or something, and only 5 or 6 made it. Matt D was up there. But yeah, got on the roof of the hotel in Texas, and I was the first person on the roof. I turned around, I was like, dude, the skyline is absolutely gorgeous. You could see all the way out to the Dallas airport. And then it dawned on me, I was like, this is probably the last thing I'm going to see. This guy's definitely going to kill
remember
us.
hearing that story and just being like, oh, I'm glad I missed out on that. This seems sketchy as hell.
It was fun. It was worth it. It was definitely scary.
That's it. Full circle. Always go to a place where you feel uncomfortable eating because the food's probably better, and come to knife shows to have far out weird experiences with strange individuals making pocket knives. Done. I love it.
Well, it's like one year in Atlanta, we were shooting fireworks off in the parking lot, and Ken Onion came out to yell at us.
Kids, cut it out.
Told us we were ruining this. You kids are ruining the sanctity of Blade Show. Meanwhile, there's fireworks going across a street at the baseball park. Oh, okay.
All right. I love it, man. Well, I really appreciate you jumping on here with us and chatting and talking about your story. And yeah, man, it's been a blast. I gotta say, and catching up on all the Graham news and everything. If there's anything else that we didn't go over, we'll have to catch up on another episode soon.
Yeah, man, I had a blast. I'd love to do it again. Gets me away from being out in the shop by myself all day.
All right, gentlemen. Well, I appreciate everybody listening out there in podcast town. This is me, Jeremiah. I'm signing off. I'll see you guys soon, gents.
This is Nick Chuprin of NCC Knives, signing off.
Chuck Gudritis of Gudritis Knives, signing off.
Kirk Mayberry of KM Designs, signing off.
To find out more about myself, Jeremiah Burbank, you can email me about the podcast at bladeologypodcast@gmail.com or my work email, info@pvk.com, or you can check out the website, www.pvk.com. To find out more about my co-host, Nick Chuprin, you can find him on Instagram at NCC Knives or on his website, www.nccknives.com. You can also shoot him an email, contact@ncckknives.com. Chuck Gudritis can be found on Instagram at Gudritis Knives, which is GEDRAITIS. You can also find Chuck on Facebook with his Facebook group, Chuck Gudritis Handcrafted Knives, or shoot him an email at gudritisKnives@yahoo.com.